Good afternoon. I'm kind of tall. There we go. There we go. There we go. I feel very privileged and honored to be here. So I want to really start off with gratitude. I'm grateful to be sharing this space with you, but I don't stand alone. Wherever I go, I bring my ancestors with me. So I really ask myself, whose shoulders do I stand on? When I come into a space, whose shoulders, again, am I standing on? I think of my mother and my father. I think of my grandparents. I think of the 7 generations of great-grandparents. I also believe in, I'm standing on the shoulders of freedom fighters that I believe in, that I've learned in college and beyond, that I carry their spirit with me when I'm in the classroom, or I'm in the community, or I'm in social gatherings. As we move along in regards to the time that we share together, I really encourage you to ask yourself, whose shoulders do you stand on? When you're in the college classroom, who's with you? When you walk the stage, for those of you that are going to walk the stage in May, who's with you? When you are in institutions, whose shoulders are you standing on? Because you are not alone, nor did you do this alone. So I really challenge folks to be able to challenge the colonized mind of the whole notion of I did this myself. That is a dominant narrative that is a lie. There's people that spoke life into us. There's people that gave us an opportunity. There's people that talked us off of a ledge. There's people all around us that we're in relation with. And so I encourage you, as we share this time together, to ask yourself, whose shoulders do you stand on? I want to share with you a little bit about my hopes on my hope for today in regards to the information that I'm going to share. If you can change the slide here. So really, my hope is to share with you today. I think we can get caught up, oftentimes, in higher education, and I teach in higher education, with the institutionalization of it all. Like, I'm here and I know this and you know nothing, and we deposit information in blank minds. We know that's not true. I'm just simply here sharing information. I'm both a teacher and I'm a student always. So I'm sharing information. And I hope that we walk away seeing our reflection in others. It's in Lakesh, you are my other self and I am your other self. And so parts of my story, you may see your own reflection. And when you ask questions and we engage afterwards, that I may see myself in you. And then also that we walk away really reassessing our social location in the influence of all our relationships. We're constantly learning about the other, always, even in social justice. And it's rare that we identify our social location, where our influence, where we're broken as service providers. And so that I really encourage you to challenge yourself to be able to say, where is my social location in this issue, in this space? What influences me, and how do I influence others? And so that's my hope as we move forward today. I'm going to share first with my social location, right? A little bit about my story, a little bit about me. My story begins in Turlock. I was born and raised in Turlock, on the west side of town. It's predominantly, anyone from Turlock? Born and raised? No? Oh my goodness, what? So I was born and raised in Turlock, west side Turlock. It's known as the poor side of town, overwhelmingly folks of color and poor whites. I owe a lot of gratitude for Turlock, and in particular west side Turlock and the Central Valley, which is my home. So I grew up in a lower middle class I grew up in a lower middle class family that had economic privileges that bubbled me and really sheltered me. And what I mean by that is that I never heard my parents argue about money. My parents own their home. They own their cars, plural. And so I grew up in this bubble of privilege. But my social location in that was that I also lived across the street from the projects, where all my friends lived. Interesting location. in particular, as a young woman, a young girl that had a critical mind. Because poverty was up close and personal. I had that bubble of sheltered, but at the same time, I could reach the poverty. I was able to play with my friends and be able to go over there, and there's three sisters playing with one Barbie. And I was one person, well, two in my family, but I was the only one that played Barbies, and I had 25. It was symbolic. So I remember as a young little girl, I asked my mom, "Can you get me a case with wheels so I could wheel it across so we could share my Barbies?" I think that was kind of a foreshadowing of things to come. So it was interesting that I had this critical mind, growing really, middle class privileges, realizing I was being treated differently because of those privileges. Going to a poor school was known historically underperforming, but yet my best friend and I were treated with an elevated status. But my other friends weren't. And I was a little girl that questioned why. What's going on? And I didn't have the language until I learned about it in sociology in college. Then I realized, oh, well, that was some shit right there. That was some shit. So now again, I'm able to call it out. I was a young girl that always had a critical mind, and it was not seen as a positive thing because while my family is a hybrid of a traditional modern Mexican family, it still believed in obedience. And I was a young girl that wanted to know why. Not about being disobedient or defiant, but I just had a critical mind and I wanted to see the bigger picture. I wanted to know my social location as a child in the mix of things. Perhaps I was born a sociologist. But that was not awarded. If anything, my family had its limitations and they would shut me down because I said so. Shut up already, Melanie. You think too much, Melanie. And so that being shut down but at the same time, that lives in you. When you honor your spirit, you're like, I'm supposed to keep asking questions. But as a little girl, being shut down and living with that cognitive dissonance of like, oh, this feels uncomfortable. And I always hung on to that spirit of always asking why. And so again, that was some of my experiences in terms of being a critical-minded young Chicana in a house that did not encourage critical thought. I also was introduced to dating violence in my first relationship. My first relationship was emotionally abusive, verbally abusive, also physically abusive in regards to restraining me. And that followed me, that haunted me for quite some time. I had years of being bullied, many years of being bullied. Never feeling comfortable in my own skin is really the theme of the majority of my life. No longer can I say that, but the majority of my life, that's the theme. Uncomfortable in my own skin. You see, I grew up in a home that was a very proud Mexican home, Mexican Chicano home, but I was also Mexican American, and my family didn't teach me Spanish, so my Spanish is very broken, and they were victims of assimilation, cultural genocide. And again, I didn't know that language until later, and so now I could have empathy and see my parents' humanity of why they didn't teach me Spanish, because they were victims of cultural genocide. And but I was too American for the Mexicans, and I was too Mexican for the Americans. And so I lived in the hyphen of Mexican American, resentful, angry, homeless, and just wanted to belong. But no one wanted to own me. No one wanted to be like, come on over here, right? So I lived with being uncomfortable for quite some time, and it wasn't until adulthood where I found my belonging. And not only did I find my belonging, I created places of belonging. And so I'm really appreciative of college. College is part of my story. I'm actually alumni of CSU Stanislaus. Hey, yeah, shout! and in sociology. But first, my major was psychology. Mad love to psych majors too. Mad love to psych majors. But I came in as a psychology major. I was in a committed relationship with psychology, and sociology whispered sweet nothings in my ear. It was like, "Hey, baby girl," and I was like, "No, I'm in a committed relationship. No, no, no." I like to say that I chose psychology. Sociology chose me. Sociology chose me. And so it's been my longest love since. I fell in love with it at the age of 19. I'm older than 19. So yes. It was college where I actually found out my social location, in the sense that I found out that I wasn't as free as I thought I was. The dominant narrative of pull yourself up from your bootstraps, that we're free because we're American. It was in college where I was like, oh shit, I'm not as free as this dominant narrative. And who's creating this dominant narrative? Wait a minute. So I learned about my captivity in college. But I also learned about my liberation in college. Sociology giving me the language and the tools for my freedom. That while I might find myself in institutions that are bigger than myself, that regardless, I maneuver through spaces as a free woman in spaces that might not be so free. Okay? And so I appreciate college for that, and then also for finding out for giving me a home. I went from living on the hyphen of Mexican American to being Xicana. It was through ethnic studies courses where I was able to say, that's what I am. Here to hear the instructor talk about it, and I'm like, dude's describing me. I'm like, man, Dr. Luevano, that's me, Dr. Luevano. I'm Xicana, right? I found a home immediately in that lecture. I'm so grateful for that. And so when I think about spaces where we might not be so free, I think about, do you guys all remember, maybe some of you will remember, the 1977 famous miniseries Roots? Oh, it was a classic. If you haven't watched it, please watch it. It's like 8 hours, I think, right? Something like that. So I think about that famous sitcom, the famous miniseries. And this really introduces us to the family line of Alex Haley, and his ancestors from enslavement to liberation. And there's this scene that I don't know how many times I've watched it. It vibrates in me. I think it taps into aspects of ancestral memory in me. It beats like a drum. And this scene is where Kunta Kinte, who is a beautiful African Mandinka warrior, is captured and brought to the colonies. In this scene, he is shackled, and the overseer is getting him from this caged area because it's his time to be on the slave auction. And so they're bringing him, and he's chained up. His neck's chained, his arms are chained, his feet's chained, and they're pulling him like an animal. And as they're pulling him, everything in Kunta Kinte is being defiant, is hanging on to his liberation, his cultural pride, and who he is. And they're pulling him. And in terms of his body language, his facial expressions, resisting that, because he's a free man. He knows he's a free man. And he looks around and he doesn't understand that he's seeing folks in black skin, but they look different and they act different. It's this, right? This scene in terms of resisting, I always think of, pause on that. So that whole scene, there's this onlooker looking at the scenario of the overseers pulling Kunta Kinte to the auction block. And the onlooker says, look at his eyes. He's not even close to being broken. I struggle to keep Kunta alive in the spaces that I'm in. I look for Kunta in others. Toyopurina, an indigenous shaman freedom fighter, I look for Toyopurina in people's eyes. And then when I'm in spaces of captivity, I summon those ancestors to be able to say, how do we fight for freedom? What good is education if it does not go beyond institutional walls? What good is education if we're not talking liberation? What good is education if we are talking about just being comfortable on the plantation or comfortable on the reservation? Especially social work, especially sociology. We need to be talking about liberation, or we are doing disservice to ourselves and others. So again, looking at those eyes and being able to, because in some people, Kunta's lost. It's Toby. And so to be able to look and to be able to summon, you're in there. Or I'll feel him or Toyo Pini to come up, be decentered, and I feel it being lost in me, and then grab that spirit. No, to be centered. It's really through moments that I just kind of briefly mentioned in terms of college, finding out about my captivity, finding out about my liberation, domestic violence relationship, being bullied for so many years by like multiple groups of people, feeling uncomfortable in my own skin, not having a belonging. All of that darkness became my light. All of it became my light, transformed it. And it became my strength. And so I emerged from a house that wasn't able to appreciate critical thinking, but now I can be an educator that encourages critical thinking. That little girl, I'm honoring that little girl. It's okay. Think deeper. Push further. Help me grow. I'll help you grow. Right? And then also, all those years of feeling like I didn't belong, now I can create spaces of belonging. But maybe I wouldn't be able to create spaces of belonging if I didn't know if I didn't experience not belonging. That it became my gift of creating spaces of belonging. For all those times that I felt unsafe in social spaces, now I can co-create spaces of greater connection and of safety. I think about social justice and really the importance of moving away from being transactional to being transformative. Many times in our institutions, we talk about do this, do that, A plus B equals C, and it's all transactional. We're like robotic. Even within higher education, we got to talk about truth to power. How are we being more transformative and less transactional? Oftentimes, the academy teaches us a lot about important theories and concepts and processes and tools, but it is rare that it teaches us to deeply explore ourselves. If we're going to be doing social justice work, we're part of the equation. How I've influenced you and how you influence me. I can't just examine the other. And then when we have our degrees, we have the authority to pathologize other people and not even take responsibility or accountability. Because being in a position of power and authority, I don't have to look at myself because I have the power to look at you and pathologize you. We have to check ourselves, especially when we have power and authority. Especially because we can create more harm and hurt more people if we don't. If we're lucky, we get those few classes where we learn about self and our social location and making this world a more just world. Oftentimes, the academy teaches us obedience, conformity, to think critically, as long as it doesn't apply to our own institutions. I already have 1 minute? Holy smokes. Critical thought and critical processes have glass ceilings. We have to be able to think about how we want to be more transformative ourselves. If we want to transform institutions, how can we transform institutions if we're not transformative? And transformative is a process. We don't just like, I'm transformative, I've arrived. Drop the mic. No. Sometimes we can go into spaces and we can say, I missed the mark. There's times when I'm in the class, I'm like, I totally was colonized in that space. and I have to like apologize to my students. I am so sorry. I will begin again. Right? It requires humility. Um, and so I had a whole bunch more to say, but I have a minute. Um, but I think that it's important to be able to, again, how do we move from being transactional to being transformative? We have to start with self. But we jump to the other. We jump. We are ready. Let me be critical of the other, right? Let's back up. Where do we need healing? Where are we incomplete? How does my behaviors influence you, and how do you influence me? If we can, oh, there we go. Thank you. The takeaways. Okay, I got it. Okay, takeaways. So the takeaways. So I hope that you walk away to be able to ask yourself, to go into spaces, either college spaces or whatever outside of the institution, to be able to ask yourself tonight, whose shoulders do you stand on? Who do you bring in the room? I'm less likely to disrespect you if I know your grandma's in the room and your auntie and the freedom fighters. I'm more likely to hear you, and you're more likely to hear me because you know my grandma's in the room. To be able to assess your social location and the influence in all social relations, to acknowledge the importance of continued self-worth, and to be transformative in a transactional world. I'll end in this note, if we can go to the next slide with Marcus Garvey's quote here. The ends you serve that are selfish will take you no further than yourself, but the ends you serve that are for all in common will take you to eternity. Marcus Garvey. Thank you so much.